A unique kite carnival, sponsored by the Smithsonian Institution, brings out some 500 homemade kites of all sizes and shapes. The announced purpose of the event, just for everyone to have a good time.
We can't pick him out of the crowd, but Paul Garber is here someplace. This 1960s kite festival was his idea, a tribute to the primitive aeronautical device that afforded man his first opportunity, albeit vicariously, to soar with the birds, something Paul Garber wanted to do for as long as he could remember.
I used to play with paper soldiers, and I'd have a regular parade up there in the attic. But I'd often go to the window and look out in the yard and wish that I could jump out and fly.
The fantasy of a child would ultimately lead to the reality of the most popular museum in the world. For while others stretched their wings, Paul Garber would take his love of flying to the Smithsonian, devoting his life to recording the ups and downs of the pioneers and preserving their planes. In recent years, he was historian emeritus, which means, according to Garber, just an old fud who won't quit.
I'm the oldest thing around except the mummy on the third floor of the building. He has a few years on me.
Garber was born in 1899, when man was still trying to find his wings, had gotten off the ground only with balloons and fragile gliders. By the time Paul was 5, his budding interest in aviation, he owned his first kite, attracted the attention of a famous Washington, D.C. neighbor, Alexander Graham Bell.
Dr. Bell saw me flying the kite. He came over and stood beside me. He said, "That kite is not bridled properly." Then he stepped out in the street, held the kite up. I gave it a yank. Up it went, much better. Then he came on back. He said, "There," he says, and patted me on the head. So I've been patted on the head by Alexander Graham Bell.
When he was 9, Garber witnessed one of the Wright brothers' early demonstration flights, an experience, in more modern terms, comparable to being at the Cape for a rocket launch.
I was just rooted to the spot with admiration and astounding, not surprised because I knew it was there, but just the magnificence of it all. I'd never before seen an airplane flying. To this day, when I see a 747, I can look right through it and see that right airplane.
A teenage Paul Garber founded a model airplane club and built one of the earliest hang gliders, not much more than a giant kite, really. With his pals pulling the string, he defied gravity. Briefly.
All my friends ran, and with this kite-like action, I began to rise too, and as a kite, and they stopped in wonder, and stopped running, and down I went back this way, and down on my tail and the glider's tail.
The dream of flying a real plane prompted him to enlist in World War I, but before Sergeant Garber could get into the sky, there was peace on Earth. So he signed on with the Airmail Service, and while it got off the ground, his career as a pilot did not.
The airmail advanced and was the great example in the 1920s of progress in aviation. We were the foundation of commercial aviation in America, and the first in the world. And I was their chief slave.
In his spare time, Garber would hang around the Smithsonian, which by then had acquired one of the Wright brothers' early planes.
I'd come back again and again to see that. On one of those trips, I saw this glider that I copied into my kite. And then, with my father disappointed in me because I was not a merchant, and my interest in this place here, I applied for the position.
He refocused the dream from flying planes to collecting them, ultimately building the largest collection of historic aircraft in the world. Sometimes his enthusiasm got ahead of history. As soon as his old buddy from the airmail days, Charles Lindbergh, took off, Garber wanted his boss to send a cable to Paris asking for the plane.
I said, "Sir, we ought to have it, sir, because it's a very important type. It's a new design, and It's got good instruments, got a right rear wind engine, sir, and it's got a pilot in there. It's an airmail pilot. I know how fine they are, how good they are, because I worked with them for a while. Sir, we ought to have it. By the time I slowed down, about a half an hour later, he said, well, now, Garber, he hasn't gotten there yet.
The cable got sent, and Garber caught the spirit. It was a coup that made subsequent acquisitions much easier. And when man started shooting at the stars, Paul Garber started collecting rockets, space capsules, and satellites. Because his life spanned the entire history of powered flight, he viewed tragic events, like the Challenger disaster, in that perspective. As part of the price, aerial explorers have always paid for progress, ever since glider pilot Otto Lilienthal made the ultimate sacrifice in 1896.
His last words were, sacrifices must be made. He was thinking of progress, you see, not this regrettable death of himself, but that we had to get there the hard way sometimes.
However we got there, Garber and colleagues have preserved the experience, gathered so many objects that even the cavernous Air and Space Museum can't begin to accommodate the memories.
That's one thing about here at the museum. To me, it's not stuff, it's memories.
The memories they can't display fill acres of space in suburban Maryland at a giant restoration and storage complex, oh so appropriately named the Garber Facility. A tribute to the little fellow with a twinkle in his eye who did more than anyone else to preserve and protect the wings of man for all of us.